The Power Moms Network, empowering moms to lift the world.
Welcome. I'm Riley Karsh.
I'm Tova Kopan.
We are thrilled to bring you the We Go Boldly podcast.
Let's talk big burning questions, life changes, and maybe a bit of personal business.
Let's be bold and brave together. Are you ready?
I am. Here comes the show.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to We Go Boldly, the podcast where we are thrilled to be a part of the Power Moms Network. At Power Moms Network, we are empowering moms and creating a community of mothers mentoring other moms to greatness. It's a fantastic place to be. We highly encourage you all to check it out on your own when you have time, and let us know what you think. You can join the community and reach out anytime. So we are in season 11. It is a challenging season. It is all about sort of undoing, letting go of, releasing, whatever word you would like to insert there that feels right for you. The things that are holding us back from our past, right? The things that we have learned that are not like great for us, the things that we have been taught, those voices, all that stuff. So this is really a season that is the culmination of all the seasons that came before. Not surprisingly. So we're going to dive into talking about understanding the impact that your past has on you today. Before we do that, of course, I'm going to say hello to Tova and welcome her to the show and see how are you doing this fine, not quite fall afternoon, Tova. What's going on?
Well, it feels like fall.
It does. It's beautiful. I've got plaid on.
Yeah, I wore a sweater because I was like, well, it's not really warm enough to wear a sweater, but it's almost warm enough. And when the podcast comes out, it will be warm. Well, actually, we'll probably be one of those like fall summers. And
yeah,
people
exactly.
will be like, why are they wearing sweaters? It's 100 degrees out.
Right. Do you think it's weird that we obsessively think about and talk about the weather? Like, do other people listen to the show and they're like, why do they start every show talking about the weather?
No, because
I don't know.
I don't think it's weird. I think that people talk about the weather.
I genuinely find weather fascinating. And my son has strongly influenced this because he went through this, as do many children, this like really intense weather knowledge phase. So like my knowledge of tornado classes and like hurricanes and the risk of tsunamis and all these things is pretty high right now. It'll go away soon because, short-term memory recall.
Sure.
But it's there for the moment. Anyway, I find it fascinating and it like really impacts your life. So I guess it's not weird that we're talking about it.
I mean, I will tell you, so I like most weather. As long as it's seasonal. I really struggle when the weather isn't seasonal.
And when it's hot at Christmas.
When it's hot at Christmas, when it's like, even if it's a beautiful day, like if it's an amazing, beautiful day at Christmas, I'm like, yeah, cool. Can you save it? Like, what's going on? Like I don't appreciate good weather when it's not seasonally appropriate.
Yeah.
So even this, I'm like, cool your jets. We still have 2 weeks. I know the rest of the country has basically gone back to school, but like we still have 2 weeks from yesterday on the day we're recording until school's back. And it's like, I want to go to the pool a couple more times. And this happens every August, that there is this weird, it gets cool in August the last few years.
Yeah. And then in September, it's suddenly like sweltering.
So hot. And it's like, but the pool's closed, but it's open now. I want it to be hot now. So I don't know. I think, I do think climate in general is on people's minds.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It's funny that you mentioned that because I do think that there's a trope that weather is small talk, but for you and I, it isn't. Like,
that's what
genuinely
I think
care.
That's what I was trying, like, kind of referring to, is that like we're legitimately concerned about and interested in and like thinking about weather at any given time, much the same way we're thinking about like trauma and like responses and parenting and all those other fun things.
Well, and I do wonder if I will care less about the weather when like I'm the only one I'm dressing.
Yeah, or like you're the only one you have to like get to any given place or whatever.
Yeah, not to totally well, no, this is right on course, actually. So a story that I have told myself a lot over the years, and especially, I don't know that it's a story that I'm telling myself recently or that I'm just noticing that I'm telling myself recently, is that I'm an overthinker. And I'm like, oh, I overthink that. Oh, I overthink these things. And I'm really, I'm not at the phase where I'm not doing it yet, not telling the story yet. And we'll actually get to this really soon about like how to change the stories that you tell yourself.
Yeah.
But, yesterday I was texting with somebody and I said, yeah, I'm just overthinking that again. Or I made some like kind of flippant comment about like, there's me like overthinking things. And, I said, because I was trying to figure out my schedule today. And I'm like, I'm trying to figure out like, what am I going to do? And we were trying to figure out if we could schedule this recording today. And I was like, jokingly said, you're going to find it surprising, but I'm overthinking tomorrow. And they were like, overthinking, no way. And then I said, one could argue that I'm thinking just the right amount for somebody with like 87 balls in the air.
Right.
And like, yesterday we were at urgent care with an earache and like, 3 kids, like maybe I'm not overthinking. Maybe I'm just thinking. And
yeah,
one thing that the main thing that we're going to talk about is understanding, the impact of our past. That's our focus today. And one of the biggest ways our past impacts us is that we tell ourselves these stories. And do I think that sometimes I overthink things? Yes. Yes, I do. But do I think that sometimes I just think an appropriate amount for somebody who has a lot of responsibilities?
Yeah, I have so many thoughts on this overthinking. I have thought about this a lot. And I'm not even trying to be funny. I legitimately think about this because I personally struggle with small decisions. Like,
Yeah.
do I buy this brand of milk or this brand of milk? Like that for me is super overwhelming. I spend way too much time thinking about it. It's like a massive waste of my time and energy to like worry about. And other small decisions like which shoe to wear or like silly stuff that for other people might be a big deal, but really when I like make the choice and do the thing, like it's irrelevant, right? Like it wasn't a big choice.
Right.
And so I've thought a lot about it because I, like you, I'm like, oh God, I'm such an overthinker. Why am I always overthinking everything? And then I had sort of a similar kind of light bulb moment, I guess, where I was like, I have so much on my plate right now, like as a human, that it requires a lot of thinking, like and strategizing and planning and coordinating and putting things on calendars. And, that requires a lot of mental effort. And so that's not overthinking. So just to get to the point of these stories we tell ourselves, and then we're going to back up, I guess. But like you're saying, like, I have always been like, oh, you're such an overthinker. Why don't you just make a decision and do something? Right. Which is a real, like, kind of not nice way to talk to and about yourself.
Right.
And so it feels great to be able to be like, yeah, I kind of still feel that way about like the small decisions, but I'm actually getting better about it and working on it and letting things go and not being so anxious about that stuff. And so, like, all right, but I'm changing that story. And then on the flip side, like, that's not accurate, right? Like,
right.
We're doing all these things. We have to think about it.
And I think what you just said, like, it's a balance, right? Because there is perfectionism and anxiety involved, right? So there is that fear of making the wrong decision. And I think a lot of people who would be classic not overthinkers, I don't want to say underthinkers, but just like not overthinkers would just be like, yeah, but if you made the wrong decision, you'll just change it. Like next time you'll go to different milk. It's not a big deal.
Exactly.
And so, yes, for those types of decisions, sure. But there are other decisions, and let's be honest, the majority of decisions are those types of decisions.
Yeah.
But when you layer them on top of each other, there is sort of a house of cards that
well, there's fatigue there, right? Like there's mental fatigue.
And it's interesting. So you I have been thinking about this a lot, and we were just on vacation and we had ice cream and we tried to go to different local ice cream places. And we went to a place. And sometimes I know exactly what I want. And sometimes I'm like, I don't know, like similar to my coffee picking and tea picking, like I rarely get the same thing.
Yeah.
My son, my oldest son got chocolate chip cookie dough everywhere he went because after the second place, he was like, oh, now that's what I'm going to do. Cause now I can compare them. Like now that's
Sure.
going to be like my thing.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah. And but I got to the third or fourth place and I couldn't decide. And he was like, come on, mom, like pick. And I just look at him and I go, do you know how many things I have to decide in a day? Like, seriously,
Yeah.
do you know? And I was at the front of the line and we'd already given the three other options. And I was like, so what are your favorite options? I mean, it was one of those places that had like honey lavender and like all these great
Sure.
choices. And I was like, do you understand how many questions or how many things and questions I have to answer and things I have to decide in a day? And he was like, no, because clearly he doesn't, and nor should he at 12. But it felt good to just say it out loud.
Yeah.
And be like, oh, okay. So this is why it's taking long, not because I'm indecisive and not because I can't make a decision, but just because I'm tired of like, just give me one of the ice creams. They all look great. I'm sure it'll be good.
Right. Well, and so I think there's a level of overwhelm too. And some of it is like internal overwhelm, but then some of it is external overwhelm. Like, why are there 60 kinds?
Yeah,
Right?
5 would have been great.
Like, why do we have 12 billion types of cereal in the cereal aisle? That's not necessary. We have it because, companies want to make money. But like, when I travel out of the country or I'm like somewhere else and I go to a grocery store and there's like 3 options, let me just tell you, I make a decision much faster, right? Like you're not you're not getting like bowled over by sensory input every time you go into a store. You have like a couple options and you pick the one that feels the best and you move on. Whereas here, you go into the store, like laundry detergent, for God's sake, it's like there's 45 different kinds. I just want to clean my clothes. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, that's a benefit of having sensitive skin. I'm like, which are the free and clears? That's what
Yeah.
I'm looking for.
Well, right. So you find ways to like
Yeah.
process of elimination things, but it's still overwhelming.
It is. And it's interesting because I was talking to my 12-year-old again, and I don't know how we got up on the subject, but about helping. And I don't know how we got on the subject about like a balanced household or something, or I don't know, marriage and everything. And I said something about, you can be doing that right now because he has a girlfriend. It's very cute. And I said, you can be setting that stage right now in your relationship. And he's like, Mom, we don't share like chores. And I said, you do. I said, there's something called, and now I'm blanking out,
the mental load.
The mental load. And I said, now I've seen you guys do share it. I said, but when you're making plans, it should not be on her to make the plans. It should be on both of you to make group plans. And it should be on, and I said, and I've seen you both do it and you are both involved. And like, that's the way it needs to be. And that's at this age, how you split up responsibilities for the two of you. And I said, and you're doing it. So you're doing a great job. But yeah, this has taken a turn, but I do think it's really important, and we're going to talk about it right now.
Yeah.
To think about those stories, understanding how the past has changed you, because so many times, like maybe I think of myself as an overthinker because somebody told me last week, hey, you're an overthinker, or don't overthink this. Or maybe it's because it's something I watched on TV a year ago.
Yeah.
But maybe it's something that I have always struggled with, right? Or maybe it's something that I have been carrying with me. And it is a story that I have told myself. And we all heard over the summer where I had that thing about adventure and how I was telling myself this wacky story about adventure. And I don't really know even the origins of it, but like what it meant to be adventurous. And it was just a weird story that I was telling myself. And so the fact of the matter is, there are ways that the past can affect us. And some of them are very direct, like a parent dies when you're young, like a divorce. Like they're very clear ways that trauma, not that there's good trauma, but life events,
yeah,
good or bad, can affect your life, and you can have the past trickle into your life. And today we want to talk a little bit about like both making sure you're not, living in the past. And there have been other episodes that we've talked about that. But then also not just, making sure you're mindful and making sure you're in the moment, but really making sure that the stories that you're telling yourself, and this is probably going to be a theme, I think, that we're going to talk about a lot through the next 3 months.
Yeah.
Because it's something that Brene Brown talks about, and she talks about it, I think, less in the macro sense and more in the like micro, like I'm in a fight with my husband and the story I'm telling myself is like, he's ignoring me because he's angry at me and he doesn't like me anymore.
Right.
And like in reality, he just like was listening to something on a radio, like
Yeah.
But the macro idea of the story you're telling yourself and needing to be able to identify that story. And sometimes you need to know the origin to work through it, and you need a therapist and you need a lot of help. And sometimes you just need to identify the story. Like, oh, wow, the story we've been telling ourselves is that we're overthinkers. And that has added a burden to us while we are trying to navigate parenthood and motherhood and business owners and all of this other stuff. We have put this extra weight of maybe, I don't know if it's shame or guilt or something, that we're carrying this story with us.
Yeah, this idea that somehow we're flawed and failing because we don't make immediate decisions about every single thing that ever happens in our lives, right? Like, which is absurd. But I think it's really important, and maybe we just take the example of the adventure discussion, to recognize that you can change your story, right? Like, you did it in real time for us, right? It was like this is what I think, but this doesn't make any sense. I'm going to think this now. And no, it is not always that easy. It is not always that simple. And I'm sure it still isn't even that easy for you. I'm sure there's moments where you're like, yeah, no, I'm not that adventurous, blah, blah, blah. And then you have to reiterate the new story to yourself, right? Like it requires practice. It requires thoughtfulness and conscientious sort of awareness of yourself and the stories you're telling yourself and the things you think about yourself. And, this all plays back into the idea of recognizing your inner voice, whose inner voice you're listening to, like why you're doing the things you're doing. And I think, again, importantly, you also don't always have to understand what happened to create the story in order to change the story. Sometimes, like I think I've talked about this before, I struggle with not knowing why, right? Like I want all the answers. I want to know exactly why I'm doing something and like understand the root cause of every single thing that's ever happened in my life. That is unrealistic, right? Like sometimes we just stumble into things and they happen and they get stuck in our head and we don't even know why, right?
Yeah.
But the important flip side of that is that we can then change those. We can make different choices. And you have a quote here, which I really like. And it's just, you can change your thoughts and you change your world. Who was that? Norman Vincent Peale. I don't know who that is. But it doesn't matter because it's a great quote and it's true. Like you can change the way you're thinking about yourself, about the world around you. You can change anything at any given time. I'm not suggesting it's easy. There are times where it's extremely hard. If you've suffered, some sort of violent trauma or, lifetime of trauma, changing the way you think is very, very challenging. Not impossible, but very hard. So I don't want to downplay it or be dismissive of the work that goes into that.
Well, and so I want to table this for a second. I want to talk about, because I do want to talk about how, I guess I'm going to look at the time because I thought we should take a break.
Yeah.
We're going to take a break in a minute, but when we come back from our break, I want to talk about a little about how our memories sort of interact with us, because the stories we tell ourselves are based in memories. But the fact is that oftentimes memories are lies. I mean, they're just big liars that are lying to us, and not on purpose, but they are reinforcing something that maybe isn't true. So let's just take a quick break and then we will be right back. And we'll talk about how memories are lying to us.
Well, hey there, dream chaser. Are you ready to make the next 12 months of your life unforgettable? Introducing the Year of You, a groundbreaking new goal system group that's about to redefine the way we approach personal growth. Join us with a community of like-minded individuals committed to unlocking their full potential with expert guidance, personalized strategies, kind-hearted accountability, and a supportive network. The Year of You is more than just a goal-setting group. It's a whole movement. Don't just dream about it, achieve it. Click in the link in our show notes or go ahead and visit us at goboldlyinitiative.com/year of you to learn more today. Let's embark on a transformative journey together towards becoming the best versions we can be. The Year of You, where your goals become reality.
Okay, welcome back. So I left saying that memories are lying to us, and memories are not all lying to us. There are some memories that are obviously telling the truth, but I encourage any of you to, if you have a diary or a journal from when you were younger, whether it was like 3 weeks ago or 30 years ago, if you open it up and you read the words in it, there's a very good chance that your instinct maybe to say, or your gut's going to be like, well, that's not my recollection of what happened. And so one of the two things is true. Either what you wrote down was looking at a situation from sort of such a small window. Like I can look at some of the stuff from my middle school diaries and high school and be like, ooh, that was an interesting take. That was a hot take. Yeah. It probably wasn't too true. So maybe your window was just so small. The other situation is, no, it was true because it happened to you that day and you wrote it down and that was your experience, which is true even in the middle school and high school ones because that was my experience.
Right.
But over time, my memory, my recollection of what took place has now evolved, has now changed. And so the memories are telling me a story. I can picture things in my head. I remember what took place, but the story they're telling me are not necessarily accurate. It's not necessarily true of what actually happened. And it might be enforcing something wonderful. It may be lifting me up, or it might be reinforcing something traumatic or reinforcing something awful that happened.
Right.
And so, I think sometimes, and, both of us went through law school. I was never a criminal attorney, but you have to take criminal law in law school. And I think I took an extra criminal law class just because I like the professor. And, you learn that people's recollections of what happened it's not, I won't want to say it's untrue, but you could have 6 different people. You could have 30 different people. You're going to have 30 different recollections of what happened.
Yeah. Well, so I think it's also super important to acknowledge that your memory is through the lens of whatever is happening in your life today, right? So when something happens, you have wherever you're at that moment is where you're at. And so you're going to view what's happening to you, around you, for you, whatever, through the lens of your current lived experience. And like, if you take the example you're giving, Tova, of like your middle school journal or whatever, as a middle schooler with like 13 years of life experience and, heightened emotions and raging hormones and whatever else is going on, that's the lens through which you're viewing the world. And so that's the lens through which you're writing down your experience, or you're forming those memories. Yeah. And then 30 years later in your 40s, you have a whole different lived experience. And so when you look back, you're looking back at those memories through the lens of whatever is happening to you now. And like, for example, like I would not as a kid be able to say, and I think most kids wouldn't be able to recognize trauma and talk about like generational trauma and, symptoms of whatever, neglect and all these things. They'd talk about it in kid terms, right? And then when you look back at it, you apply the knowledge you've gained over time. And that's one way in which memory changes, right? Because you're looking at it as an adult, or you're looking at it 10 years later, and you have a whole new vocabulary to even contemplate the memory with. And unfortunately or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, that can skew the memory in whatever way you're viewing things. So I think that is one of the main reasons memory is kind of fluid. It's not a photograph of time. It's not like you took a snapshot in time and you
Right.
stuck it in your filing cabinet brain. You took a snapshot in time, but it's more like a video, and you edit the video every time you think about it.
Yeah. And I think the other thing is, so as we talk about how to maybe write news stories for yourself, one thing we're going to talk about is you need to find moments that have strong emotional connections to you. And I basically feel like we all just need to watch Inside Out 2 and discuss it. Um, and even Inside Out 1, but especially even Inside Out 1 and how they
Yeah.
build those islands and those core memories. But the fact is that, like, you could have an incredibly embarrassing experience and it could really impact you. And then you could learn something like 2 days later that maybe you realize that, like, oh, that wasn't actually embarrassing. Like, oh, that wasn't a big deal. No one saw it. But because that experience was so impactful and was tied to such a strong emotion, that might stick with you and be like a building block of a core memory that, even though like that it in your life as you were experiencing at that time, it didn't hang with you. Like, you were like, oh, cool. Yeah, it was no big deal. And you moved on from it. But like deep inside you, it was like a little building block of a core memory,
Right.
because it hung so tightly to an emotion. And so, I think that we've said this before, we believe things to be true that are fiction. And I didn't keep it in the outline, and I should have, but it was like what the quote, and I don't know who I'm gonna once again say a quote, not have the right quote or attribute it to the right person, but it's gonna be something along the lines of the greatest truths are fiction, or something along those lines. But we tell ourselves these things and then we believe them for decades. And without taking the time to analyze, why are we thinking that? Or even not even looking at the whole picture, right? So once again, shout out to Inside Out 2 for teaching me about all my social emotional learning that I ever needed. Who needed to go to
That's
get
okay. We didn't get it in elementary or middle school, so
Yeah,
we're getting it now.
We're getting it now.
Next to our kids.
Yeah. Through Pixar. I know there's every once in a while I'm like, what would I be like if I would have watched this movie when I was 9?
Oh my God. So yeah.
The
So
other
many
one
things.
is the other one's Frozen too. I was like, what? I mean, I know, like, I don't know. I'm probably the only adult that's like, Frozen 2 is the best Disney musical cartoon ever in the world, but it is. And I will stand by it. I'm like, what would it have been like if we would have been watching like Moana,
Right.
and Frozen 2, where like the princesses are like saving themselves.
Yeah.
And anyway, I digress.
And they have like an emotional vocabulary.
They have an emotional vocabulary, and they're like, oh wait, I'm the one I've been waiting for.
Right.
And their boyfriend / almost fiance is like, it's good, my love isn't fragile, what do you need?
Right.
Like, what?
Modeling healthy relationships.
What?
Crazy.
Anyway, and so it's been a while since we've recorded.
I know we're really going on some tangents, but that's fine. They all kind of come back around.
Yeah. We'll get there. But one thing I think about with Inside Out 2, and I think it's really important, is when we're building these stories, and with Inside Out 2, when they were building those memories, Joy was so focused on saying like, hey, no, just focus on the good stuff.
Yeah.
And she wasn't realizing that, like, well, sometimes it's when you have the sad moments that then it's like, then you have your parents picking you up, or then you have the celebration afterwards, or the hugs after. Like, you have those moments. And so I think sometimes when we're creating these stories, and I say we're creating these stories, it's almost entirely unconscious.
Right.
And so, or in your
subconscious.
Yeah, you're knocked out, whatever. And I'm saying, so we're actually talking about taking something that is done subconsciously and bringing it to a conscious level,
right,
which makes it really complicated and confusing and hard to do. So good luck. But But listen, I started the episode telling you how I did it, how I thought about how, oh, I'm telling myself a story that I'm an overthinker. So it can be done.
Right.
But like, I think when you take the time to look back, and if it is a memory or if it is a story built on a memory, that you realize, oh, I'm only looking at the first part. I'm not looking at the second part.
Right.
I'm only looking at the fall and not the getting up afterwards.
Right. Well, so I think really important and stressful at the same time is that when we allow ourselves to acknowledge the harder moments of life, we're building our resilience, right?
Yeah.
And I would love to be less resilient sometimes, but that's not life. And so the reality is we as a human in this world have to allow ourselves to fail. We have to allow ourselves to have flaws. We have to allow those like Joy was pushing those bad memories to the back of the mind. We have to stop doing that and acknowledge and accept them as, this is what happened. This is part of my life. And look at me now. I survived it. Like I survived every one of my worst days, right? And the reality is like that sucks. There are times where you're just like, I don't want to think about those things. Or like Tova, you and I are putting things in boxes on shelves sometimes, right? And that you have to do sometimes. That's just sometimes that is the healthiest thing you can do in the moment. But if that's all you're ever doing, right? Like if you're never examining those harder moments, those difficult things that happen, then you kind of, and I've said this in like 80 bajillion episodes, you stagnate, right? And when you stagnate, you're not growing, you're not changing, you're not evolving, and you're not really living your life. So unfortunately, we have to acknowledge these like harder things that happen, and the times where we get on stage and we, give a terrible speech, or the times where we do something embarrassing, and it's a part of life, and it's okay, and we're allowed to be, flawed. We're allowed we're allowed to not be perfect, shockingly. I keep telling myself anyway. And so when we get stuck in these cycles of like, well, for me, I've talked about this before. When I was a kid, everyone was like, you're so serious. Why are you so serious? She never smiles. She should smile more. Make her smile. She's so serious. If you know me in real life, I'm actually very funny. I swear it. I'm funny.
That's she is.
I spent like decades not allowing that part of my personality to come out because I was telling myself the story that I'm serious. I'm a serious person and all I do is be serious. Or like I would be embarrassed when I was being like, said something funny or made a joke or like laughed with people. I would find it embarrassing, which is bizarre. Like that's a weird reaction to laughter, right? And so bringing that, fortunately with the help of a therapist, bringing that to my consciousness, allowed me to change that story like we're talking about. And so, I don't know, I feel like an infomercial. If I can do it, you can do it too. And if you, want a knife, we can do that. I don't know. Like I think that we spend so much time believing opinions to be truths,
yes,
thoughts to be facts, that we forget we're in charge. You're in charge of yourself. You're in charge of what you think about yourself and how you feel. It's your choices to make. Sometimes it's super hard. And a lot of times, and this is our regular plug for therapy, a lot of times you need a therapist to help you kind of work through all that stuff and change those stories and figure out like what tools do I need in order to change these stories I'm saying about myself. And then in other cases, you could change it overnight. You could be like, you know what? I'm not overthinking. I'm actually just planning like a responsible adult.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
I just have a lot to do.
Yeah. And I don't want to forget anything.
I think too, like you said, some of this is going to, and we're going to talk about this over the next season, like as soon as next week. Some of this is trauma and some of this is really intense. And some of it is just shifting the narrative.
Yes.
Like some of it is, for lack of a better term, like adopting a growth mindset. Like, okay, that window did close and then it opened another one. And that's not silver lining. It's just what happened. And it was okay. And I was okay. And I just kept going. So let's talk a little bit about that process of, we're going to take a break and then we're going to come back and we're going to talk a little bit about the process of navigating that process of like identifying the story and then maybe shifting it or making a new one. So not in the case necessarily where there is trauma and you should go see a therapist. Probably the only time I'll really use the word should.
Yeah.
But when this is something that you can go, oh, okay. Like I really wasn't loud. I was just talking normally and they were super sensitive. That's okay. I'll shift this a little.
Right. And I know we need to take a break, but I want to comment on that because even if you are loud, like my kid is super loud. She talks at a volume that like is bonkers. It's not a negative, right? Like you don't, these stories we've told ourselves and we turn them into flaws and failures and negatives and like personality failings. That's the story we can change. If you're loud, you're loud. Like, I don't know. My husband's super loud. It's just his whole family is loud. They're loud people. And that doesn't make them bad people. There's nothing wrong with them. That's just how they talk. So we can change those stories, I think.
Not to totally digress, but I will right before the break. So we went to visit Cape Cod over vacation and I loved it. My kids were less so. They like the ocean, like they like a more traditional ocean experience with boogie boards and the waves in Cape Cod weren't up to snuff, at least when we were there. Of course, they're making a snap decision over one day at the ocean, but what was interesting is we sort of realized we love the lake. We went kayaking. We had so much fun in the bay, but we're like ocean people. Like we need that background noise to like hush our loudness.
Mm-hmm.
We were at the lake and my kids were just yelling. They were so loud and they weren't, I was so uncomfortable and they weren't inappropriate. They weren't like obnoxiously loud, except that nobody else was loud. Like nobody else was making noise. And so I did finally, like, I kept feeling like, guys, you just don't yell. And then I was like, this is bananas. Like, we're outside at a park
on vacation.
And so I finally went to them and I was just like, okay, I recognize this is bananas. I recognize that we're outside at a park, but like, I don't know why, but nobody else is yelling. Like there's no other noise at this lake and it's like echoing. So can you just like, if you don't have to yell, like maybe just not like, because they were just like for no reason. And it was like screeching, like there was just no reason yelling. Yeah. And I'm like, maybe just like not yell. I'm like, I know you're outside and this seems like a strange request and not like really not an appropriate request for children on vacation at a park. But like also nobody else is making noise. And I don't know, it's like New England. I don't know what's happening. The Puritans are coming, but like it's just like I don't know. So, but then like when we did finally get to the ocean and it was like the roar of the ocean, like muffled the sounds and I can't even hear my kids like from 20 feet away. I'm like, what? It's like, oh, such peace.
Relief.
Oh my gosh. So let's take a quick break.
Yeah. We'll be right back, everyone.
Hey, pod friends, it's us again. Looking for a place to collaborate, an opportunity to share your knowledge? Have you been working so hard on a podcast, book, course, product, or retreat? Do you have insights that could light up our podcast? Well, we want to hear from you. We would love to support you in all that you are and do. Join us at Go Boldly Initiative, where we celebrate diverse perspectives and share the wisdom of our incredible community. Whether you're an expert, a hobbyist, or simply love learning, we invite you to reach out with your ideas. Visit our website at goboldlyinitiative.com/podcast guests to pitch the show or shoot us an email at hello@goboldlyinitiative.com to talk all things collaboration, advertising, and affiliation opportunities. Become part of our growing family. Let's make learning an adventure together. All right, welcome back. So let's talk about this a little. We've been saying you need to, first step is identify the story you're telling yourself, right? And so that's easy peasy, not at all. It's very difficult. You don't even realize you're doing it. The nice thing is if you've been with us for the last few years, hopefully you've been working on identifying your inner voice. And if you've been doing that, then you are at least somewhat connected with hearing what's going on in your head a little bit. And so I think the first step then is to like say, okay, am I telling myself a story? Like, and it's as simple as being like, I was joking with my friend that I was overthinking, and then being like, wait, why am I doing that?
I think when if you start to be more self-aware, right, of that voice in your head, and you hear yourself criticizing yourself, right? Like if you hear a critical voice of any kind, it doesn't mean it's wrong. Maybe like you really did do something wrong and you need to apologize. I don't know.
Yeah.
But flag it, right? Like that's a time to flag things. Like you flagged that. You're like, wait, why am I saying I'm an overthinker? Like that it feels like a negative. I don't know where it's coming from. And then that sort of cues you up to have this thought process of, am I telling myself a story? Is something like not aligning here? But again, you have to be conscientious about it. Like you have to be aware of what you're thinking and saying and doing, which is not always easy. It doesn't always come naturally. So if you haven't started working on your inner voice, you can sign up on our website at Go Boldly Initiative, or on our in our social media at Go Boldly Together. You can sign up for our free email course, which will help you sort of launch your journey into figuring out what your inner voice is and who it is and how it works.
Yeah. So I think, like you said, just start noticing what you're saying. We've talked about that a lot, like noticing that mean voice if you're being mean, but now maybe notice it if it's repeating the same thing over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
And let's be honest, sometimes it's neutral. It's just not true. Like saying I'm not adventurous, that's not mean. That's just is.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe it is for a person who's as adventurous as I am.
Yeah. Well, it was just wildly untrue. But I also think like if you take it as a negative, because I think in your case, like you took it as a negative, like, oh, I'm not adventurous. And if you take it as a negative that like you're an overthinker, or you laugh too loud, or if there's a 2 in the sentence, like these are red flags that like something's going on. You're not funny, you don't smile, you smile too much, you don't think enough. Like there's any number of things we could be saying to ourselves that may or may not be true, but they're worth examining to really get a better understanding of who you are.
Yeah, I think that's fair. So then, like you said, you want to continue, you want to analyze the story, right? So figure out like, is it true? And then where did it come from? And sometimes it matters where it came from. I think I want to dig a little deeper into this overthinking thing, because I have a feeling that it is something deeper. And sometimes it doesn't matter. Like I don't really care about this adventurous thing.
Right.
It doesn't matter to me. I can, I don't think it's going to hold me back from needing to be able to move on from it. So you decide, right?
Like if you're if we're talking about big T trauma, right? Like that's different. If we're talking about the kinds of things you and I have mentioned so far, I think it's much easier. It's not easier, but it's like it's a I don't know, it's a faster process in some ways.
Yeah. Yeah. Agreed. So one thing I like is, and I don't know that we've said this yet, we are not telling you to not tell yourself stories. You're going to tell yourself stories. It's just what's going to happen. Your brain is not going to suddenly stop talking to itself, right? Like it's not going to suddenly like go silent. That
Right.
was never the goal of us, encouraging you to listen to your inner voice. We don't want you to like shut it down. But
No, we
you
want you to amp it up.
yeah. We suddenly I had an image of like the RNC versus the DNC. So if your brain is currently the RNC, where it's just kind of like scrunchy, angry people,
Right.
and then little John is over here, like Michelle Obama, right? Like,
Yeah. I know where I'm gravitating.
yeah. Although I will say, I realize like as much as I'm having such FOMO for the DNC right now,
Mhm.
and like, friends are posting pictures who are there, and it just looks like it would be such a great time. I also am like, every time I'm like, I would need such a dark, quiet room after being in there.
Yeah.
Like the overstimulation that must be happening in that room.
It's intense.
Oh my God.
I
Oh
feel it.
my
I'm
God.
not there. Like I feel it from the posts and the pictures and the comments and the
Yeah.
whatevers.
Yeah. I mean, basically I had a wall. I try to watch a little here and there, and then I'm like, okay, cool. I'm gonna go to bed and I'll watch. I've been listening to the end speeches in the morning on my walk. Like
Yeah.
that's fine.
Yeah.
Okay. So you get to choose a story. You get to choose Michelle Obama telling you to do something and that you can make decisions in your life, right? So
Right.
there's always another story that you can tell, right? You can find that story and hold on to it. And it doesn't have to be even a different story. So I hope my son wouldn't mind me telling this story, but last year he ran for class president and he lost. And I said, no matter what happens, we're going out for ice cream on Friday, like win or lose. And my then 7-year-old was like, well, why? Like if he loses, like why are we going out for ice cream? And I said, well, because he tried. Like only 5 kids or 4 kids ran. So out of 250 kids, only 4 kids were brave enough to write a speech and make a poster and put their names out there and do all of this stuff. And that deserves to be celebrated,
Mm-hmm.
like win or lose. So we're going out for ice cream on Friday. If he told himself a story for his whole life, because it was the second year that he ran for president and lost, that he just ran for president all the time and lost, that would be a really sad story.
Yeah.
He could use the same story, the same facts, right? He ran for president and lost, and talk about how he kept trying and he kept putting himself out there and he was resilient and he and his family celebrated him, and he came up with this, the second year he came up with this great slogan called Copan Can. And like now his 2 of his friends still call, like when they say his name they call him Copan Can, like that's all this great stuff based on the same facts, right? But he could change the story, and it's not a silver lining. It is genuine wonderful things that happened because of that, and something that should be celebrated.
Yeah. Well, and I think, what we're talking about today is really like not not just not living in the past, right? It's also like recognizing that things that have happened in your lifetime have created the person you are, and you are in charge of that person. You are in charge of managing those stories. You are the editor, right, of your life. And you can, while you can't say that never happened, like, right? Like you can't be like, that person never broke up with me and broke my heart. You can say, they broke up with me, it broke my heart, and look how far I've come. Like I've learned all these things. It was very hard, but that doesn't mean I'm unlovable. That doesn't mean nobody
Right.
else is ever going to want me, right? Those are the kinds of stories we tell ourselves, and we don't have to. You can change that story so that whatever happened in your life, we're not going to silver lining it. Like bad things happen. Sometimes it's horrendous what happens to people. Um, on the flip side of that, you're still here. You're still growing. You're still capable of deciding what story you're going to tell about yourself, right? Are you a victim? Or are you a survivor? Are you both? I don't know. But you're the person who dictates what that is.
Yeah. Yeah. And you get to decide. Nobody else gets to decide how your story is told.
Right.
And what role you played in your story.
Right.
So, I think one thing important about when you create these new stories and is that you need to make sure that the story has all the important parts of any other story, right? So you need to be the main character. It needs to have facts, it needs to have specifics, and it needs to have an emotional hook, right? So authentic emotion and specific details, because if it's something that you can truly hang on to, and you had talked about well, we watched me kind of go through this evolution in the word adventure and adventurous, but it wasn't easy. But part of the reason it has been an easier evolution is because I have so many moments of things that the things that I did that were actually adventurous,
right?
That I have strong emotions tied to it, whether they were anxiety followed by pride or joy or excitement, right? So there are specific moments with very specific details, with big emotions tied to them.
Mm-hmm.
They can help me create a new story. And so I think that so many of these stories that carry over from our childhood into adulthood, or from last week into this week, are ones that are the reason they have staying power. They are the ones that have these strong emotions attached to them more than good facts.
Yeah.
Because honestly, as we said a long time ago, memories lie. The facts don't really matter. They should matter, they don't matter. So the memories, they get muddied over the years, but the emotions stay strong. And if you want to replace a story that is no longer serving you with a different story, you're going to need to look back and say, where are those moments? Where are the emotions? And maybe it's people have always said, I'll never do this. I'll never write a book. And maybe you've never done anything to indicate that you would write a book. But you know what? People have always said that you would never ride a horse, and you've ridden a horse. And people have always said that you would never, whatever the other, and so think about how proud you were when you finally rode the horse. And so you can figure out how the stories interact, and you can write your own story, but they need to have those, they need to be rooted in those emotions.
Yeah, I do want to add though, I think that you can write a new story as well, right? So I know we're stuck on this adventurous example, but say, for example, you didn't have all of that life experience of doing wild and crazy things that you have. Um, you know, that doesn't mean you can't become adventurous, right?
Yeah.
So that's the other side. And I know we need to wrap up, but that's the other side of the story you tell yourself about your life, is that your past does not have to dictate your future. It doesn't determine who you are tomorrow. You can decide to change. You can decide to be adventurous. You can decide to be careful. You can decide to be decisive. You can decide any number of things and take steps to create that change in your life. So that's one of the many reasons I think we need to be careful about these stories we tell ourselves, because we can lock ourselves into something that isn't necessarily required, right? You can be, it's so cheesy and cliche. You can be whatever you want to be. You can be whoever you want to be. Just figure out authentically who you are and be that person. It's very simple to say and hard to do.
Well, and as you were saying, or as we were saying, all of these things are not necessarily based in some sort of, there's not a book written in stone somewhere that's this is what happened,
right?
And this is who you are. And I think that, that's what the studies suggest, that there's There's not anything that's completely set in stone. So even your memories aren't totally reliable, and your stories that you're telling yourself aren't totally reliable. So you really get to decide, like you said, what you do next and what's your next story that you're going to write about your life or about who you are. You get to make these decisions, which is, scary, exciting, and overwhelming in a good way.
Yeah. I think it's amazing. Like, we forget that we are in charge of ourselves sometimes. Like, I know I do anyway, that I'm like, I don't have to be that person that, I thought I was. I could be this person, and this person is awesome, and this is what I want to do. And that's how we started this podcast, right? Like, I wanted to be a podcaster. I had never been. I had no experience being a podcaster, right? And now here we are. We're podcasters. I know we do need to wrap up. There's so much more to say about this topic. I didn't realize how much I had to say. So we may have to do an interim episode at some point, but I don't know. Do you have homework you want?
Well, I would like everybody this week, I think now that I'm thinking about it, I'll be really interested to see what stories I tell myself. Just working on this outline had me flagging stuff as I was working on it and then living my life. Yeah. So I want you to listen to this episode and then think about, as you're walking around your life, what stories are you telling yourself, right? And if there's one that's not too big, right? So if you find that you're telling yourself some pretty big stories that feel uncomfortable, reach out to a therapist, either your therapist or find one. But if there is a story that is bite-sized and something that you can maybe handle without the help of a therapist, break it down a little bit and think about oh, I wonder why, start asking yourself questions. Why am I telling myself that story? Where did that story come from? And is there a different story that I could be telling myself? And then choose to tell yourself a different story. So this week, I think the big one is, let's just identify some stories. We have a long week, a long season, and we have a lot of time. We're going to be having guests on that's talking about limiting beliefs. The fun part is our body carries a lot of these stories. So yay. It's not just so easy as changing our minds in some cases. But I think the first week is, let's just identify some of the stories that we tell ourselves.
Yeah. Once you've done that, feel free to share with us. If you're comfortable, share on social media at Go Boldly Together, or you can email us, send us a message anytime. We would love to hear what it is that you're trying to change. Or maybe you discovered you tell yourself an awesome story about yourself. Let us know that too. We want to hear from you. If you need some more support in the whole process, we have a weekly women's group that is a wonderful place where you can gather and meet with like-minded women. It's a great place to talk about all of these things, to be honest. You can sign up for that via our website at goboldlyinitiative.com, or on our social media. You can find a link as well. Again, that's at Go Boldly Together. So we would love to see you in that group. It's a very cool place. And I think that's it for this week. We're going to be back next week talking about trauma. So that'll be light and easy. No, it's a great conversation, and I look forward to continuing it. So good luck this week, everyone. Start listening to those voices in your head and see if there's anything you need to flag. Until next week, we will be right there with you. So thanks, everyone.
Thanks so much for listening to We Go Boldly podcast. We know you're busy and we love spending time with you.
If you enjoyed this week's episode, let us know. Head to Apple Podcasts right now to rate and review our show. While you're there, be sure to click that subscribe button.
Want more us time? Follow us on all the socials at Go Boldly Together.
Want even more us time? As in all the coaching pizzazz. Find us at goboldlyinitiative.com for all the info.
We will be back with more excitement, research, and deep thoughts next week.
Until then, keep on being the bold, brave, amazing people we know you already are.
The Power Moms Network, empowering moms to lift the world.